Albert DeSalvo, Decoding the Mind of the Boston Strangler. Darkness shadowed Boston in the early 1960s. Streets once bustling with life became stages of fear, and behind every shadow, the specter of a killer seemed to lurk. 13 women, 13 lives, snuffed out by a phantom known only as the Boston Strangler. But was this horror the work of Albert DeSalvo, with his haunting confession? Or does the truth remain buried beneath layers of ambiguity and deceit? This is not just a recounting of crimes. This is an exploration of the human mind at its most chilling. Welcome to the story of Albert DeSalvo, a man whose name became synonymous with tragedy, fear, and the complexities of justice and psychology. Albert DeSalvo was born in 1931 to a life of chaos. Raised in a home barren of love and stability, he grew up surrounded by violence, poverty, and abuse. His father, an unrepentant alcoholic, was a volatile figure who inflicted pain not just on DeSalvo, but on the entire family. Young Albert witnessed events no child should ever endure, leaving indelible scars on his psyche. By the time he reached adolescence, those same scars began to manifest as troubling behavior. He was in and out of police custody for petty crimes, breaking and entering theft, but none hinted at the darkness that would later engulf his name. Was his upbringing a seedbed for the unfolding horror? Or was DeSalvo a man doomed by innate cruelty? Here lay the early pieces of a puzzle that criminal psychologists would later analyze to understand the roots of violent behavior. In 1962, the streets of Boston grew eerily quiet, stripped of their usual life. Women started turning up dead, their lifeless bodies arranged in disturbing circumstances. 13 women, mostly elderly and living alone, were strangled to death over a span of 2 years. The killer seemed methodical, selecting victims with care. These women were bound with garments, the knots tied in ways suggesting control and forethought. There were glaring elements of sexual violence, adding layers of horror to an already appalling crime spree. The police were floundering, chasing shadowy figures while citywide panic grew. The question hung heavy in the air. Who was the monster hiding in plain sight? Albert DeSalvo didn't come into the picture as a murder suspect initially. In 1964, he was arrested, not for murder, but for a series of sexual assaults that earned him the nickname the Green Man. His arrest seemed routine, until he began confessing to something far more sinister. In horrifying detail, DeSalvo claimed responsibility for the Boston Strangler murders. He described the crime scenes and methods in ways that only the killer could have known, or so it seemed. Murder after murder, he laid bare what he allegedly did, threading a narrative that sent chills down the spines of investigators. But something about the confession felt off. While DeSalvo recounted parts of his story with unnerving precision, other details were vague or inconsistent. Could this man, this seemingly ordinary individual, truly be the Boston Strangler? The lack of physical evidence left doubts, yet his words alone were damning enough to cast him as the orchestrator of terror. Despite DeSalvo's confession, he was never formally charged with the murders. Why? Because doubts began to emerge. Investigators wondered if DeSalvo's accounts, while detailed, were influenced by information already circulating in the media. Some people speculated that he confessed to gain notoriety, to elevate himself from an inconspicuous criminal to a name that would live on in infamy. After all, DeSalvo often sought attention, even relishing in being the center of a storm. Worse still, some elements of his story clashed with forensic evidence or eyewitness accounts. Criminal psychologists dissected his behavior, but couldn't definitively confirm whether he was confessing to crimes he indeed committed, or whether he was playing mind games for reasons known only to him. The dissonance left one critical question unanswered. Did DeSalvo kill these women, or was he confessing to something he didn't do? For decades, the true identity of the Boston Strangler hovered like a shadowy enigma. And then, in 2013, forensic science took center stage. Advancements in DNA technology allowed investigators to analyze remaining evidence from one of the murders. The victim, Mary Sullivan, had been the final known victim of the Boston Strangler. DNA recovered from the scene contained conclusive links to DeSalvo, affirming some suspicions while fueling deeper questions. If DeSalvo could be tied to Sullivan's murder alone, why hadn't physical evidence ever linked him to the others? Could there have been multiple killers operating under the same guise, creating a perfect storm of confusion? The revelation illuminated a small yet pivotal piece of the puzzle, but the larger narrative remained obscured in shadows. The sensational story still lacked the closure that true crime enthusiasts and historians craved. To understand how and why DeSalvo's name remains central to this case, one must analyze his psychological profile. DeSalvo was, by all accounts, a deeply troubled individual. Despite a facade of normalcy, he was married with children, he harbored unsettling tendencies. His criminal record of sexual assaults spoke to an inability to control deviant impulses, while his erratic behavior suggested deep psychological fractures. Was he a psychopath? A narcissist? Criminal psychology has offered many frameworks to understand offenders like DeSalvo. His confessions seemed almost theatrical, as though he found a twisted satisfaction in claiming responsibility for the murders. Yet his inconsistencies hinted at a man of contradictions, eager for attention, yet calculated in his deceit. DeSalvo's behavior forced investigators and psychologists to confront uncomfortable realities about the criminal mind. Does every killer fit a profile? Or can some operate outside known patterns, leaving trails marred by ambiguity? As the Boston Strangler case spiraled into a nationwide obsession, the media played a decisive role in shaping its narrative. Newspapers heralded every development, their headlines dripping with dread. Strangler at large. They painted a city under siege and turned the idea of the faceless killer into a cultural phenomenon. But therein lay the danger. The more the media speculated, the harder it became to differentiate fact from sensationalism. Did the overblown media coverage influence DeSalvo's confession? Did he absorb these stories and reconstruct them as his own? The interplay between crime, media, and public psychology creates a vortex of fear, a fear that Boston's residents knew all too well. More than 50 years after the Boston Strangler's reign of terror, his case continues to influence the fields of criminology, psychology, and forensic science. It forced law enforcement to evolve dramatically, pressing the need for solid forensic foundations rather than over-reliance on confessions. The case also changed how we view the criminal mind, teaching us to question the narrative's perpetrator's craft, to consider the possibility of deception, and to weigh the psychology behind their actions. It remains a chilling study of humanity's darkest capabilities. For aspiring criminal psychologists, the story of Albert DeSalvo is a haunting reminder of humanity's complexities. For the public, it is a true crime tale that still sends shivers down spines. And for the victims, it is a legacy demanding remembrance, a call to ensure they are more than just footnotes in a case that shocked a nation. Even now, the case defies closure. Was Albert DeSalvo the Boston Strangler, or was he merely the face of a larger, more intricate puzzle? The connective tissue of forensic evidence, confession, and psychological analysis fails to fully stitch together the story. It leaves us suspended in uncertainty, where the shadow of doubt looms large. True crime challenges us to face the darkness, not just on the streets of Boston, but within the human psyche itself. The tale of Albert DeSalvo beckons us to linger in the unsettling gray area between good and evil, truth and deception, certainty and mystery. And in that gray area, the legacy of the Boston Strangler resides, haunting, unresolved, unforgettable,